Good morning. This is Diana Block, your online instructor for organizational behavior. This is week 4, and we're in the fall 2014 quarter. During week 4, we're going to learn more about communication and also cross-cultural communication. So this is involved in chapter 7 and 8. That is your reading for this week is chapters 7 and 8. So you're also going to have a discussion topic. And in the discussion, you're being asked whether or not you feel you're cut out for international work. So we're wanting to focus this discussion. Are you cut out for international work? We're wanting to focus this discussion on the specific skills and characteristics that would be beneficial to a person who is working internationally. So that's going to be out of chapter 8, where they're going to discuss cross-cultural relationships and how to be successful in international business. What do you need to know about developing relationships with other cultures in a working sense? There's also in chapter 8 some characteristics of the successful person who works overseas. That's on page 223. So you may want to start there to see if you feel like you're a good match for those characteristics. Now, a lot of people are going to say, I am not cut out for international work because I don't want to leave my family. That's not really what we're asking here. For one, just because you work internationally, there's no assumption that you're going to leave your family. Most of the time, when people take a job in another country, their family moves along with them. So we're not asking, are you single or are you independent of being able to travel away from your family? That's not what we're asking. We're asking on a professional level, are you someone who has the characteristics that you would work well in an international environment as far as the work characteristics, the concepts that we're talking about in the chapter? So let's keep it business focused if at all possible. Of course, there's some personal decisions that will affect it, but for the most part, the conversation is on a professional level. How do you feel about ambiguity? How would you feel about a language barrier? How would you feel about cultural differences in the workplace? So yeah, we're assuming that there's not an issue with your family going with you. So let's not turn the conversation into that, and it usually does for some reason. So that's going to be your discussion question. So then when we look back at the assignment itself, the assignment you're going to do this week, we're going to back up to chapter 7. The first part of the assignment is over chapter 7, and it's this article on the Mayo Clinic on page 198. So if you read this article on page 198, it's going to tell you a little bit about the Mayo Clinic and how they operate. And of course, as usual, there's going to be some questions at the end. And the first one is asking you what particular one-on-one relationship does the Mayo focus on. And so again, we're asking you for information related to specific concepts and theories inside the chapter to answer that question. So if you look back on pages 186 and 187 is where we discuss relationships and how communication and trust relate to relationship. So throughout the chapter, but also on those pages, 186, 187, 188. So there's a lot of information there, specific concepts related to what we're talking about. The next question asks you about the Mayo Clinic's motto and what principle they're referring to. So again, you're wanting to get a specific principle out of the chapter, and explain how that relates to the Mayo Clinic's motto. A good thing to do would be to look at chapter 202. I'm sorry, not chapter, page 202, because in page 202 you see all the chapter summary and key terms. So these are all the key terminology, the topics that were covered in chapter 7. So you should be able to use some of these terms in your answers to the questions. So that's how you'll know if you've done the assignment correctly, is if you have specifically pointed to and brought up some of these chapter summary and key terms in your responses. If you haven't used any of these key terms in your responses, you haven't done the assignment correctly, because you need to refer to specific concepts from the chapter, and that's every week that happens. So you'll answer all three of those Mayo Clinic questions for your chapter 7 portion of the assignment. Then the second part of the assignment is where we're again talking about cross-cultural relationships, and that is in chapter 8. At the end of chapter 8, there's an article on Lincoln Electric, and it starts on page 229, and then the actual questions are on page 230. So make sure you flip over to the top of 230 to get the 3 questions for Lincoln Electric. So when you go to the Lincoln Electric article, the first question is, list the major cultural problems Lincoln Electric faced when it went international. So again, this is a question where people tend to get very general, so general that you wouldn't even relate their answer to organizational behavior, and that's a mistake. We want to give a specific cultural problem that is discussed in the chapter, not just that they didn't know anything about other cultures. That's an answer people commonly give. They didn't know anything about other cultures. Well, we got that from the article, but we want you to identify a specific cultural problem that's identified in the chapter. For example, on page 213 of chapter 8, you get a discussion there of high and low context cultures. I'll give you a hint. High and low context cultures relate to the issue. So when you discuss the major cultural problems there, one of them has to do with high and low context cultures. Monochronic and polychronic cultures is discussed on that same page. So there are several concepts throughout the chapter, specific concepts that explain what the problems were that Lincoln Electric had, and that's what we're looking for. I'm looking for you to identify specific concepts, terminology from the reading that apply to this situation. Um, then the next question asks, what should Lincoln have done to avoid these problems? And again, I'm looking for information from the chapter. And if you go to page 224, you will see an art or a section of the chapter titled "How You Can Develop Cross-Cultural Skills," and it gives some suggestions here. It goes on for several pages of what can be done to develop your cross-cultural skills, and then of course there's additional information in the rest of the chapter, but this will give you specific suggestions, terminology, concepts from the chapter that you could use to answer that question. So you'll answer all 3 of the questions related to Lincoln Electric using concepts and terminology from the chapters to answer your questions. I will keep reinforcing that because it's so important. The class grading is based on your use of the course concepts, not just giving general opinions about the articles. I need to know that you're using the organizational behavior concepts and terminology that we're reading about and applying those to the articles that we're reading at the end of the chapters. Um, that's going to also be important when your papers come up later in the course. You will have a movie analysis paper. Is going to be the first one that first paper we're going to do in week 8. And I just want to have you prepared so that you're already in the habit of using the course terminology, because that'll be really important in those papers as well. So also this week, we've got our first quiz. So don't forget to take the quiz. This is a new entry this week, and it is a 40-question multiple choice quiz, and it covers chapters 1 through 8. So everything from the beginning through the reading that's included for this week. So make sure you complete that along with the discussion and the assignment. And then there are some additional learning resources. This practice quiz, I always suggest you can do that on your iPad so that you can be prepared before you take the actual quiz. You can take the practice quizzes from the textbook publisher for all the chapters so far. And then the rest of these articles relate to international business, the expat exchange and globalization article, and also some of the book recommendations talk about how you're able to launch a career internationally if you're so interested in that. So some great additional learning resources for you this week as well. If you have any questions, I'm always available. Just give me an email and I will return your email very quickly, within an hour or so usually, at the very latest the next day. So I look forward to talking to you in the discussion this week, and have a great day.